Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to the CPUT Library Database Research Topic Selection and Overview of Research Proposal Workshop. This is particularly directed at new master students and even doctorate students. No one's joined the live session as per yet, but just thought I'd show my face. I am recording this presentation on different platforms, and I will upload the recording of this video on Blackboard so that seeing there is no one attending the live session as yet, we'll be able to access this session. So right, just to start, I'm going to share my screen. And the session that I'm conducting today is, just going to minimize all of these things, is how to use the CPUT Library Database to search for articles, an overview of the research topic selection, which is combined with the guideline overview for the completion of the research proposal submission. I'm Prof. Rodney Duffett from the marketing department, and yeah, let's go into the first PowerPoint presentation. I will kind of jump between the PowerPoint presentations just so that it has a logical flow. So I'll first deal with the topic selection. Then I'll go to the library database search because that makes more sense, and then I will cover the research proposal guidelines as per the faculty template that you should have been given. So it's Rodney Duffett, marketing department. Yeah, so let's proceed. So just in terms of a master's degree purpose statement, if there are any doctorate students, that will be slightly different, but a research-based qualification demonstrates knowledge gained from critical engagement with relevant research and disciplinary practices and using an appropriate process of inquiry in an ethical manner. So the outcomes are to select appropriate topic based on a theoretical or practical problem, which will have some form of theoretical or practical contribution to knowledge. Select and use research methodologies, technologies, and procedures within your discipline according to the design that is apt or appropriate for your indicated research. Critically review and analyze relevant literature, so I will be speaking about that. Collect, analyze, interpret, and present empirical data. Present the research for the research community according to appropriate academic writing conventions, and conduct research in an independent and ethical manner. Take note that at master's level you don't need to create new knowledge or a new model, but you simply need to show that you are masters of these outcomes, so the research process mentioned here. But if you do create a new model or provide new information, obviously that will help improve your mark. The purpose of the masters is to have a viable researchable problem in obviously your whatever discipline you are studying in, an acceptable plan of action, you've done sufficient preparation to establish the rationale for the research, and there's a feasible chance of completing the research. Research Masters Framework, so you basically need to select a topic, understand the theoretical practical element of the problem, select and implement the methodology, set out the results logically, arrive at logical conclusions, make recommendations for the improvement or elimination of the problem. So the problem could be a research problem, by the way, which is, as mentioned above, which is a theoretical problem and not necessarily a practical problem. In fact, most are more theoretical problems than practical problems, and results in some form of theoretical practical contribution to the knowledge, but not necessarily a new knowledge, a new model but yeah, it provides information. So to start off with, that was just by way of introduction. Yeah, so searching and identifying a suitable topic. The first most important element is to read, and then read some more. The more you read, the more familiar you're going to become with possible topics that relate to your discipline from whichever department you come from. So read popular press articles from newspapers, magazines, websites, blogs, online sources, just to gain, an understanding of what's out there. From a marketing perspective, we read the bizcommunity.coza website or .com website, and we read the emarketer.coza as well, because BizCommunity really gives us a good overview of everything that's happening in marketing, advertising, and media, and everything that's related to our topic. And this is a good way to pick up trends and what's new. Read academic work is also very important. So to find theses, journal articles, and textbooks, I will show you how to find theses and journal articles via the library database search. So the more work, the more articles you can find, the better, because this will give you a clearer understanding. And then those would have been written in academic format, which gives you or provides you with possibilities of, you could take other research, you take other research and you adapt it to your needs. So it's giving you a good framework, it's giving you the constructs and the scales that you need if you're doing quantitative research, and if you're doing qualitative research, it's possibly giving you the research questions and even semi-structured interview questions that you could use. A starting point, though, is to refer to SARBinet's current completed research and search for your topic in that section, because this is where all the completed theses are listed. You can also go to the CPUT website, the Digital Knowledge, and that also lists all the theses that are completed at CPUT, but SARBinet lists the theses that are busy, current, and completed in terms of the whole of South Africa. So, if your topic has already been done in South Africa, you can't replicate it. However, if you find topics overseas and in different countries, then yes, you could replicate those studies in South Africa if they weren't conducted before. Discuss possible research interest areas with academics, colleagues, students, and mentors. So you need to talk it over as well to fine-tune your topic. And that's the hardest part. You could have a broad idea of what you want to do, but then again, you can't interview every person in the whole of South Africa on a broad topic. You need to narrow it down to something that's manageable and not too big. So the feasibility or viability of the research topic, you can ask yourself the following questions. Is the research topic relevant to your discipline? So in my instance, it's marketing, but for you, it could be any other variety. Will the topic keep you interested in 2 to 5 years? So if you're doing a doctorate year, you get 5-6 years. If you're doing a master's part-time, you get 4 years. But will your topic keep, if you take 4 years and you're a part-time student, full-time, I think it's 3 years, will it keep you interested for that extended period of time? Because that's all you're going to be working on. Will the research or topic still be relevant in 5 years' time? So that's another question. You could get to the end of your research and the topic's no longer relevant. Or you could be investigating a certain platform that no longer exists. So you need to take that into consideration. Have you identified a suitable research gap? So we'll talk about that later. Will you be able to get permission? So if you need to interview a certain company, you need to get ethical clearance. And will you be able to get access to the people that you need to interview or survey? Can the research topic be empirically tested? So some things may not well be researchable. Do you have the time, money, and ability to implement? Does the research topic have practical, theoretical implications where you can make recommendations and contributions to knowledge? Because often people come up with a topic and, well, we say we know the answer to that. And so it's hard to build on it. Is the topic significant enough to warrant the research? So what? Who cares? So is it of interest to others? And will an opportunity be missed if the research is not conducted? So those are questions you can ask yourself. So the research title, um, we'll go back to that slide. I just gave an example of a research title here, but let's first go to the next slide. Yeah, the research title guidelines. Titles generally range from 12 to 15 words. They need to reflect the important independent variables. So that is what your topic is, usually the variable that's mentioned um, in your title. So you may be wanting to consider intention to purchase of something, but there could be a whole lot of sorry, that's a dependent variable. So you could be wanting to look at intention to purchase. So that's a dependent variable, but you want to consider the influence of another lots of other variables on intention to purchase, and those would be the independent variables. Yeah. Do not start a title with a present participle. So do not start with investigating or analyzing. So no ing. You can say an investigation. Although an investigation or a study in is also meaningless. So as I say, an analysis, investigation, a study or exploration, because all studies are that. So try and avoid those words if possible. Add the context. You always need to state where the study is being conducted, in Cape Town or South Africa, according to where you're going to interview or survey your subjects. I say refer to the electronic theses and dissertation repository, the CPUT Library website, again for current and completed research. So yeah, that's important to see that your topic hasn't been done. And all journal articles that you find serve as possible examples of titles that you could adapt. So just to go to the first slide, so usually one attempts to include some aspect of the theoretical model that your research is based on, or most research is based on some or other model. So say, for example, you want to investigate customer satisfaction, and that the model you would use is a technology acceptance model. Your broad theme is mobile. Your specific topic is mobile shopping apps. The particular industry that you want to interview, maybe you want to interview Gen Y or Gen Z, is institutions and university. The target group or sample that you need to consider is millennials, Generation Y, or it could be Z students. The context is Cape Town. So based on these elements, you could now create your title. And I'm going to use this example as we go through. That's one of my master students who has now completed, and he will graduate in June. And although this wasn't his exact title, I've just used his general theme as the example. So the influence of mobile shopping apps on customer satisfaction among millennial university students in Cape Town. It could be a topic, or it could just as well, these days most students actually don't fall in the millennial category anymore, they more fall in Generation Z. So other examples of titles of my students: post-purchase experience as antecedents to customer satisfaction within mobile commerce in Cape Town. So that was his actual title. Or social media as a marketing communication strategy amongst independent food retailers in Cape Town. And there's many more here. And if you go down, there's a few examples. So my main interest area, you can see, is digital marketing, social media, and marketing communications. So these are just examples of titles that you could use. Right, so before I now jump to the introduction, the first step of the research proposal, I'm now going to go to the library search, because once you know more or less what your topic's about, so in this case, if you look at this slide, if you use this as a template to work out the different elements of your title, you now have the key words that you can use to search for information on the CPUT website. So I will go to the library database search, PowerPoint. So I put everything as sort of control print screens, images in here, so I don't need to go live onto the website, because running Teams and surfing the website may be a bit much for my internet connection. So this way it's also a bit quicker to go through. So you go to the library, you click library, then you click research support. So you click research support. Now you can search the institutional repository, which includes the work that the theses that have been uploaded there, or at least not only theses, but the journal articles that staff members and students have written. And you can also search electronic thesis and dissertation repository, which will give you access to theses. CPUT is open access, so whether you're a student or not, you'll be able to access these elements. So you'll see here's the institutional repository. It has a lot of work that we have written as academics and yourself, the students. And then this is where you can find theses of CPUT. So now, if you know what your key words are, and I've actually used a different example for this, I haven't continued with the mobile example. So the example I've used here is, let me just go to the other PowerPoint. Let's just see if I have it, social media. Yeah, the title I've used for the example is the influence of Google shopping ads on intention to purchase amongst Generation Y in Cape Town. Okay, so that's the example that I've used, Google shopping ads or Google search ads on intention to purchase among Generation Y in Cape Town. So if we go to this, so keywords that relate to your search could be search engine ads, advertising, paid search, search advertising, sponsored, Google ads, sponsored links. So these words all relate to your key topic, which is, and Google shopping ads in itself. Then your constructs, your main construct, your intention to purchase is your dependent variable, and you want to look at intention to purchase in relation to these other independent variables: brand awareness, trust, credibility, perceived value, irritation, product risk, time risk, security risk. So these words you could also search for, and you're not necessarily going to find a lot of research on search advertising and Google ads and sponsored ads, but if you find similar constructs that were researched in other digital platforms, such as social media, websites, and mobile, those articles can also be useful because they still fall within the digital arena. The models that these constructs came from the hierarchy effects, advertising value, and perceived risk. So yeah, you can also search for those, and then the main target group is Generation Y, but there could be articles on Generation Z. Often they go hand in hand. So these are keywords you can use to search. Now you can use keywords to search for individual databases. So if you're in the CPT library, you click databases, and now you can click this alphabetically. If you just click on A, then you can scroll down and click on various databases that you can use. So Academic Search Premier. The two that I use the most, or the three that I use the most, is Emerald and Science Direct, which is also called Elsevier. That's where I search for most. But Google Scholar is a third option that I sometimes use, although the quality of the research that is not always the best there. But yeah, you sometimes find a few good sources there. Then the Dissertations and Theses is a database where you can find theses from around the world, and they're always useful if you can find something related to your topic. Sarbinet Reference and SAE Publications give you South African research. Current completed research that I've spoken about is where you can get your theses. WorldCat Dissertations is another place you can get theses. So these are some common sites that I use, but there's many more. So if you scroll down, you see there's all these sites that you can search depending on your discipline. If you click on academic search premier, then this is what it looks like. You click on open database, you type in your username and password, and now you can search. Although I always use an advanced search, but I'll show you later. Current completed research, if you click on that, that's what it looks like. And again, you can use advanced searches to search. Emerald looks like this. You can also use an advanced search. ProQuest looks like this. There's an advanced search function. Science Direct or Elsevier looks like this, and again there's advanced search function. Google Scholar, only once you search your term, then it allows you to use an advanced search. Sabinets. Right, so I always say use the advanced search functions. Search from the title, abstract, and keywords. Don't search the whole article, because then you could get 1,000 hits. So if you narrow your search using keywords down to the title, the abstract, or the keywords, and the year, initially maybe you want to get some foundation sources, but generally you want to get sources within the last 5 years. Should be sort of 2/3 of your sources in your thesis. So if I click on the advanced search for Science Direct year, it gives me the option to punch in the years, so say 205 to 220, although we're in 2021, so you'd include 2021 year, and you search the term paid search in the title, abstract, and author keywords. So this varies from database to database as to what options they give you to search, but this is a nice one. And you click search, then it's going to, okay, I didn't actually show you what it gives you, but you click search, it's going to give you a whole lot of options. Other tips to find sources, you can go to Google Scholar or Google and type in your keyword with .pdf, e.g. search engine ads.pdf. Then the search will search for all documents with the PDF in. So that really is a good tip, because then it may not be the best quality research, but if I do this search, then you see it gives me chapter 11, search, PDF understanding, and if you click on these, you can see there's a PDF, it's actually going to give you that document. So that's another way, especially if you're not a registered student anywhere, you can still do the search and find a lot of sources. Sometimes though you don't have access to articles through the CPUT library base, and the reason you access articles through the CPUT database as a student is that CPUT pays a certain amount of money to a lot of these publishers and gives you access to many more articles if you weren't a registered student. So if you went directly to Emerald or Elsevier or whatever database, you won't necessarily be able to access many of the articles. So if you can't access, you can still, even if you're not registered, you can also go to these websites, get a list of all the articles, and you take the article title, or you take their full citation, take their authors' names, the year, the name of the article, the name of the journal, the volume, the issue, the page numbers, the article title, and the DOI number. Okay, and then what you do is you go to this website, Sci-Hub, and it looks a bit, doesn't look like the best website, maybe even looks a bit dodgy, but if you punch in the title, or even better, the DOI number, and you click open, then sometimes it asks you to write in this little security check phrase. That's why it looks a bit dodgy. But here it's picked up the article. You see, that's the DOI number, by the way. That's a better thing to punch in. And then it gives me the actual article. Not always, but I would say 9 out of 10 times it gives me articles that I can't access through the database. Difficult access to articles, sometimes you can't just find it, so Google it, sometimes you get lucky. Another place you can go is coming to here is while you're unregistered, the institutional repository and electronic theses are still open access. You will not be able to access the databases, but you can access, the CPT website and articles that we've written and theses that have been published. You can go directly to the publishers' websites. and see if you can access it there. You can use Sci-Hub, Unpaywall. ResearchGate's also another place that you can go. It's sort of like the academic social media site where people share their research. There's another one called Academia, but I personally prefer ResearchGate, and you can search in ResearchGate and find a hang of a lot of research that is published in journals around the world. You can find it. You can also search Google Scholar and Google and add the PDF again. And lastly, just use Google in general. Sometimes, somewhere along the line, you can find the source that you're looking at. So these are good tips whether you're registered or unregistered. Yeah. Popular press search as well. So, often you need a lot of stats and figures, and journal articles don't always give you the most recent figures. A vast percentage of your thesis sources should be journal articles, some textbooks and some theses, but I would say like half of your thesis or more generally journal articles. And then you can have a certain percentage of internet sites, but again, not too excessive. But from a marketing perspective, we use sites like BizCommunity, eMarketer, Memburn, online newspapers for all topics, News24, IOL, business magazines, industry websites, Wikipedia. I don't allow my students to use anything with pedia at the end, but it's a good place just to get general information, and then you look at their sources at the end. So you don't use information from Wikipedia, they reference where they get the information, and then you always use the original source and you go there. So yeah, that's how to search for information. So hopefully that was helpful. So now we onto the research proposal, and I followed the faculty research proposal template, and so I'm going to now cover the various elements. Probably one of the most difficult elements of the research proposal, and where students struggle the most, is the introduction, or it's also known as the background to the research problem. Every journal article you read, their introduction, that first page or two, is the same as the background to the research problem. So every journal article you read that you find related to topic serves as an example. So this lays the groundwork by citing the origin of your idea or problem. It provides firstly background information, regarding your product. So just general information, the information contained in your research title. So I think I give you, I don't really give you examples, it's hard to, but if we go back to this example, so it would briefly talk about mobile usage, in South Africa, the growth of mobile apps. We'll speak about millennials, and provide a bit of information, and then you would speak about your actual model and your constructs that you plan to investigate in relation to what other people said in their journal articles. So we'll get back to that. So it provides the context, the area of concern, why is it researchable, it's important, why is it important to South Africa or the region. So sort of what I sort of broad categories that you can cover is the initial, so you do a research, and you can say that the initial database revealed few studies on Google search ads or mobile apps, and South Africa and globally, and then you in-text reference those you found and you describe them very briefly. You can say mobile apps or Google shopping ads, or use both examples, is a new phenomenon. It's growing fast, and then again you provide some stats. There's increased usage amongst Google shopping ads and mobile apps amongst Generation Z or Y. And again, you provide some sources to justify. So you're saying why this topic is important and why it should be investigated in general terms. Then what's key in this is to establish research gaps. What other people have found. And so you need to find journal articles and theses that mandate more research is necessary in this area. And if you can find articles that say, wow, there's not enough research on mobile apps or Google shopping ads, or in certain areas more research needs to be conducted in other countries, well then that is justifying your research. It's saying why your research is necessary. And the best place to find research gaps is to read the introductions of journal articles, because remember, they're the same as a background to the research problem. And they often say there's a lack of research or more research needs to be conducted in this area. And you can use those that to justify your research. Obviously, in-text reference, and you say, such and such says, there's insufficient research on mobile apps amongst millennials in, and then read their limitations and future research sections at the end of the article that says it is what it is, what the problems were they researched. So they could say, for argument's sake, our study was qualitative, but now there is a need for qualitative research on this topic. And future research directions, so they provide directions, so they're telling you what research needs to be done. And they say, well, this study, for example, considered, millennial students. However, there's a need for research amongst younger people, the Generation Z cohort. So it's giving you options of future research. So possible research gap categories could be additional research could be conducted in different countries amongst different sample units, so different cohorts like X, Generation Z, Y, X. Different industries, different approaches, qualitative versus quantitative, larger sample sizes or more representative sample sizes, using different platforms. So they could have done research on mobile apps or social media, and they say now there's a need for this research in search advertising. So, and what you would do is you would find as many articles as you can, and you would, I'll get to it later, but you summarize what they've written and you extract the research gaps, possible gaps out of those articles. And I'll show you later when I get to the literature review a few examples of research that I'm busy with and how I go about it. So when I'm extracting literature, I'm also looking for research gaps that I can write. And I will show you an example now, actually. So every journal article's introduction is an example of introductions and the background to the research problem. Every thesis' chapter 1 will also have a background to the research problem. So if I just show you an example of an article that I've written, right, so let's just make this a bit bigger. And so here to illustrate, so this article is on the influence of YouTube commercial communication on organic word of mouth intention to purchase and purchase associations amongst young consumers. So they're Generation Z. And so the introduction, as I say, you first take broad. So there's fast growth in social media, online video sharing platforms such as YouTube are growing. There's 4.5 billion consumers that, are exposed to digital video platforms. There's massive spend by young consumers. So you sort of paint in the background, and then now you start talking about your topic. EWAM, or user-generated content, is favorably received than advertising. You talk about organic word of mouth. In other words, it's not paid for, so it's not an influencer. So just broad. And then you go to all the studies that you find. You say there's a number of studies that conducted research on this topic, EWAM and intention to purchase. So now you need to justify why your research needs to be conducted. So you say 2 studies considered in terms of YouTube. So none of these studies on social media were on YouTube and word of mouth. And you say this study builds on previous research by the inclusion of purchase, and so makes an original contribution. So it's added additional elements. So most of these studies focused on intention to purchase, but not actually the purchase. So that's a research gap you're showing. And many of the aforementioned studies use this model. So now you talk about the theoretic model and you say how you're using whatever models you're using. Then you say a number of studies investigated YouTube as an EWAM channel. So many did. However, these studies focused on Generation Y, whereas the study focused on Generation Z. Most of the studies focused on influencers and YouTubers, not organic word of mouth. In other words, they're not paid for. Only a couple of studies considered YouTube and EWAM, but these were qualitative studies and you're doing quantitative. So this study bridges the research gaps and then you give, examples where these people said additional research is necessary on E1 in other countries. And then this study said larger sample sizes are needed. And you see it's several. And these studies said that demographic factors should be analyzed, cross-tabulated. So you're showing research gaps. And this is just in a little journal article, but it's applicable to the theses as well. So, right, the next is the statement of your research problem. So it describes what the problem is. It provides the context of the problem, the magnitude, why is it important, have other authors identified it, and again it talks about the research gaps in more detail. So in the introduction you're just listing lots of studies that are showing the research gaps, but you're not really expanding on them much. So now is the opportunity to expand on those studies and say, and now you talk about individual studies, and they give reasons why your research topic or problem is important and worth researching. And then at the end you would kind of have a summarized paragraph. I just want to see, I don't give it. So you would consider again all the different elements in your heading. So you would expand on what you're heading. So you say this study therefore considers customer satisfaction by investigating mobile shopping apps using university studies amongst the following people in Cape Town. And generally not much research has been conducted on mobile shopping apps, or let's just say Google shopping ads, in South Africa. And you list some sources, and then you say those studies that did consider mobile shopping apps in South Africa said more research was necessary in this and this area, so therefore this research will consider if customers are satisfied in terms of mobile shopping apps. So you're kind of explaining, you're giving the problem statement why this research needs to be conducted. How to find a research topic. So I just say again, subscribe and read popular press sources. Look at sites for marketing in your industry. You have specific websites, BizCommunity, eMarketer, Pure Internet Research, Member, and etc. Then conduct the academic search to find articles, theses, and textbooks, and then identify the research gaps. Every thesis again will help you, besides every introduction of a journal article will help you in this regard. The next step of your research proposal is your rationale and significance and expected outcomes. So you need to indicate why the research is significant, what contributions do you envisage it will make to knowledge and practice, who might benefit from the study, does the research contribute to the body of the knowledge, will the proposed research promote further investigation, include the expected outcomes, so what do you expect to find, and what are the expected results that you wish to achieve. So it's a bit hard at the beginning to know what you're actually going to find, but if you read enough, you should have a good idea of what you expect to find, and obviously you need to say why your research is significant. So you can extract a lot of the similar information that you put in the research, the introduction or the background to the research problem, but you write it differently. So now you write in, why is this study significant, and what is the rationale of your study. Aims and objectives. So yeah, the aim is a broad statement that basically says what you want to achieve. That's the aim. Objectives are smaller, outcome-based research intentions, so they're concise statements. Use words such as discover, determine, evaluate, ascertain, explore, examine, explain. All the objectives should help achieve the research aim, and then the research questions must be in alignment. The objectives must be divided into doesn't have to be, but can be divided into primary and secondary objectives. So here I give an example. The aim of this mobile commerce. The aim of the research is to validate drivers of customer satisfaction in m-commerce. The drivers are such and such and such. Then you give your main objective to ascertain the perceived attitudinal influence of mobile shopping apps among millennial university students in Cape Town. And then you break it down into, so to achieve this primary objective, you break it down into secondary research objectives. So to examine millennial student customer satisfaction perceptions, to establish if usage factors have an influence, to explore whether demographic factors have an influence. So these three objectives will achieve your primary objective, which will achieve your aim. Then your research questions are fully aligned to your research objectives. And so the research questions should be divided again into primary and secondary questions. The primary research question is a reformulation of the research problem. So it forms a question. The primary research objective is linked to the research problem. The secondary research needs to be linked to the primary research questions. Yet each secondary question should be researched on its own. So these primary research objectives and secondary research objectives are now just written as a question instead of an objective. So what are millennial student attitudes? What are university students' customer satisfaction perceptions? Do usage factors have an influence? Do demographic factors have an influence on mobile shopping apps? So you can see that this primary research question mirrors the primary research objective, and these three research questions are the same as these three objectives, except they're just written as a question. Right. You can also have hypothesis as well. So these days, unless my students are doing qualitative studies, for all quantitative studies they use hypothesis, and they're just statements of your research that you intend to prove in terms of a relationship between variables. An assumption is made up in front. So you could say perceived usefulness has a positive influence on customer satisfaction due to mobile shopping apps. So you need going to prove that. Once you've collected your data, we do statistical analysis, and this will prove whether you support or disprove this hypothesis. And all the others are similar. So it's very important, just to recap the first section, and this is the most, once you've completed these sections, everything else is really a piece of cake for your proposal, because these are the hardest, is to come up with a topic and to get everything to align. So your research title must align to your introduction and background research problem, to your research problem statement, to your research objectives and research questions. So if you look at all the examples in the previous slides, you'll see the title, the background to the research problem, problem statement, objectives and questions all align, and they're all pointing in one direction. The next step is your literature review. So once you've completed the first section, you should have already read enough to have enough information to create a framework for your literature review. It's also very difficult to create a framework as to the structure of your literature review, but it usually includes book, journal articles, papers, presentations, government documents, etc. The purpose of the literature review should provide evidence that you are well acquainted with past and current research, that your thesis won't duplicate previous research in the country, indicate how your intended research is similar and different from past research, and positions your research within the existing body of knowledge by citing general literature and theories related to your research. It's important that your literature review has a golden thread. So it usually starts with the background to the industry or the research is located in, an overview of the topic, past and current research, and then the theoretical framework that's going to be used. Be sure to add your own critical voice, so don't just cut and paste and mix up information. Obviously you're going to use Turnitin or Turnitin to check your work, so you can't just cut and paste your work. You need to combine different sources together, add your own voice to make it your own, and in-text reference obviously all the sources you use. Your voice forms the intellectual debate that agrees or disagrees with the author's views, and you need to continually affirm. So you give a chunk of literature, you could be talking about different mobile apps around the world, and you say, hence, at the end, this study will consider mobile apps among, and make an original contribution. So you need to continually relate the literature to your topic and to your study. Do not cut and paste sections. As I said, this is plagiarism. Reference, paraphrase, combine, add your own voice to make it your own. Referencing, be sure to in-text reference all sources that were used to write the literature. Use the Harvard reference technique, and the library gives you this specific link. It used to be called Harvard for Beginners. Now the actual title has changed. I can't remember what it's called now, but if you go to the CPUT website and postgraduate information, you'll see the Harvard documents there. Consult sources that are mainly 5 years or younger, except for the foundation sources. So you may find this article that really is the heart of your topic, and it could be 10 years old, and a lot of people have used it, or it's a specific model you're using, but it's foundational. So then you would have older articles. A ratio of sort of 2 recent sources to 1 older source is a good rule of thumb that I ask my students to try and generally stick to. Literature review tips: so review the literature from studies. What are the conclusions arrived by these studies? Has appropriate literature been examined in order to provide the background to the problem? What are the research gaps in the existing literature? Does the literature provide adequate theoretical framework? Have you reviewed the literature just as a mechanical task with no contribution or advantage to debate? So you can't just give literature without adding your own, or keep continually tying it back to your studies and adding your own voice, making sense of the literature. And does the literature correspond with your aims and objectives? So what I do is the process that I follow and ask my students to follow is search, read, summarize, paraphrase, and then combine. And then obviously add your own voice, as I've said. If you summarize one article, journal article, or thesis a day, in 100 days, you can have, just over 3 months, you can have more than 100. And so how I tell my students to summarize the article, and I spoke about this earlier in the introduction or the background to the research problem, to look for research gaps, is be sure to include the following. Where was the study conducted? Was it quantitative or qualitative, or focus groups? Because that's important, because that could be research gaps. Which countries conducted in? If they're all conducted in Europe and America, that's also showing a gap. How many respondents? So sometimes a lot of them are small studies, and you could do a larger study. Who are the respondents? So in my generation Z, X, Y, consumers, businesses, depending on your discipline, who do they interview? And then when I summarize this in a table, I also include a reference list. So here's an example, a summary of mobile shopping apps. So you put the author, the main aim, where the study was conducted, quantitative, how many respondents, who were they, because that could also show gaps. The main findings of the study, and then limitations and research gaps that you drew from the study. So the research that was conducted in a developing country where M-commerce is not used. A quantitative survey is used, whereas longitudinal studies could be used. Cross-analysis of demographic factors would provide useful information. So they could have just listed demographic factors but not done cross-tabulation. And you can also extract secondary information from the article, so you're not only looking at their findings, but who did they reference. So if you take information from the article of someone else they referenced, it's always good to try and find that article. But if you can't find the article, you always got to reference the original source. So if they're quoting someone, that's the person that you've got to citing someone, you always need to reference the original source. So if you take information from an article that they cited, you don't reference the article, you take the information, you take the sources that they quoted. So then place, summarize, paraphrase, combine this information on relevant headings in your research proposal. It's always important that you cite the original source, as I said, and in your final thesis, a much more complete and extensive research list will be presented. Refer to the CPUT library. Yeah, we've already covered that. So just to show you an example of what I do, so I showed you this, we'll just close that. I showed you this journal article which I wrote, just the introduction. But how do I get to write this introduction? You can see how many sources I have here. Many, many sources, lots of sources. In this introduction, there's probably like 60, 70 sources. I'm referencing a lot of sources here, but I need to have read those articles and summarize them to confidently write 2 lines. I've looked at 25 sources. So lots of sources. So what I do is, and here's my personal, so here's a summary of recent E1 research. So firstly, I've extracted secondary research. Well, before I go to that, let's go to my table. So I don't kind of use the same headings as you, but these are all the articles I downloaded. I extract the authors, the methodology, the main findings, and I include the research gaps here as well. It's better to use a table I gave you. So each article, these are all the articles I've extracted, and I'm even saying here, gender and age, but nationality only descriptive. So they did cross-tabulation with them, but only provided descriptive, gender and age descriptive. So I'm building a case here that most of them looked at demographic factors descriptively. So all these articles I've summarized so that I can, use this information in journal articles. And I did the same thing as a student. So you can see how many articles that I found here, and they've referenced, in-text reference is ready to use, and here's some additional more recent articles I found, and then I reference I reference it in 2 different styles depending on which journal I'm going to submit to. Obviously CPUT has their own style. So here I have the reference list of all of these articles ready to use, right? And then I'll also extract secondary information, so people they cited. So this is all about the different theoretical models, but here I have definitions of the topic that I've extracted from different sources, already paraphrased, ready to be combined and with other sources, and to add my own voice afterwards. These colors, by the way, mean that I've used this already. Then the introduction, I've extracted information that I could use in my introduction or background to research problem, and I've cited the original sources that they cited, and so I have all the research gaps and things that I could use here. Then I have a separate section on research gaps. So all of these sources suggest large samples should be used, so I can use that. All of these sources propose additional research should be conducted in E1, so it's already there to use. These said most research is conducted in US and European countries, so there's a gap in developing countries. All of these sources said that they use student samples, which reduces generalization. So, that's another gap. So all the gaps I put here. And then obviously my constructs, I've extracted secondary information from it. And then my cross-tabulation variables, I've extracted information. And then I've referenced all of their secondary sources and even tried to find these articles. These are the sources that the original journal articles cited. And now I have them here again ready to use because everything's already in text referenced. So yeah, that's what I do, and then it makes it easier for you to write if you've already done the donkey work. So we'll close that. So going back to this PowerPoint, yeah. Key concepts, so in your proposal you'll need to list key concepts, be sure to reference each concept, define them. Yeah. Then we come to the research methodology, which you will have separate sessions on in this workshop series, but it's the cornerstone of your research, the methodology. Right, use a variety of different research textbooks. I tell my students to consult at least 5 because they explain the different terms differently. Some are more clear and easier than others. There are a number of free research textbooks that are even listed on the CPT website, this LibGuides website. But if you just go to Google and you type researchmethodology.pdf, you'll find a whole lot of free research textbooks, or research methodology textbook free. You'll find lots of different free textbooks, and of course the library has many as well. What I tell my students to do for each heading is to firstly provide a brief theoretical explanation of the research element that you are going to use, only the element that you are going to use. You're not writing a research textbook where you need to write, every single sampling method that exists. You focus on the one that you're going to use and why you're using it, and then practically apply it to your study and justify their selection. Why not others? But you don't write a textbook on, each element. Do not include your every research element, every paradigm, design, and sampling technique. Focus on those that you are using. Okay, so the paradigm, clearly stated paradigm, is the common set of beliefs and agreements shared by the scientists how problems are understood and addressed. Generally, for most of my students are using a positive or post-positive for quantitative, and interpretive and post-monism for qualitative, but there are many, many different paradigms that you can use, and I suggest you just read up on them. On the textbook, discuss it with your supervisors, what best fits, and then justify and motivate. So you need to read about paradigms in textbooks, and some are, and then provide some theory, apply it to your restudy, and justify why. Your research method or approach flows from the paradigm, so generally you're going to do a qualitative or quantitative or combination, or a mixed method study. So you would state, okay, well, you would define what you're going to use, you would apply it to your study and justify why. Then you have deductive reasoning, which again you can read up about this. Usually a positive paradigm moves from general to specific to prove a hypothesis, generally from quantitative study. So you're not exploring, you have specific questions you want to ask, or a specific relationship you want to establish via a hypothesis or research question. Inductive reasoning is more interpretivism. It uses that paradigm. It moves from specific to general. So in other words, you want to maybe develop a new theory or explore something. Your research hasn't been done, it's exploratory, and you're doing in-depth interviews. So that could be qualitative research. So again, all these terms you define, you apply it, and you state why it's relevant to your study. Research design, you could use a descriptive or cross-sectional. Generally quantitative is a do research question. So, do millennials display customer satisfaction as a result of mobile shopping apps? Exploratory, observational, case study research, generally qualitative, is why question. So why does this phenomenon occur? It's open-ended. You can't, you need to get greater depth of information. Clearly state and justify the rationale for choosing the research design. In other words, why is it appropriate? Then sampling. Again, the purpose of this presentation is not to give you a research methodology lecture. It's just to give you an overview. But who is the research population? So from where will the units be drawn? So students in the Western Cape for the mobile shopping app. And then consider other elements. The sample frame is the list of sample units. E.g. CPUT students. The sample unit is the basic unit contains the elements, e.g. mobile shopping apps. So you're only going to interview those students that use mobile shopping apps. Sample elements, the smallest entity, so it's mobile shopping apps amongst millennial student users. Explain each term again, apply it to research. Sampling method, there are a number of probability techniques, simple, random, systematic, stratified, cluster, but most of our research is non-probability because of costs and time constraints, and not having access to full databases, which is very expensive. You would be using a convenience sample, purposive or judgmental or snowballing approach. So you need to define the technique you're using and justify why you're using it. Also list how big your sample should be. So because I come from a quantitative statistic background, and if you're doing cross-tabulation, you need at least 30 variables per subcategory. So if you want to consider the differences between male and female, you need 30 of each. But if you want to consider the differences between different age groups and you have 5 categories, then you need 30 in each. So 150, if you did 150 questionnaires, won't necessarily be enough, because you could have different age groups large to others. So then you've got to increase the sample size for cross-tabulation purposes. Quantitative, generally, if you survey around about 384 people, you should land up with 30 respondents for most subcategories. But there is statistical calculators. There's one called RailSoft. that you can use to calculate your sample size. Qualitative, generally 12 to 20 till the concept of data saturation occurs. So in other words, this is when you interview the next person and no new information arrives. You can look up this term, you can search for data saturation. So generally 12 to 20 suffices for semi-structured interviews. But focus groups, if you're running a couple, you could have 8 to 12 in several focus groups. So it depends on what type of qualitative research you're doing. Data collection instruments. So for quantitative, you could do a group administered or individual administered questionnaires and surveys, postal, email, telephone, face-to-face. These days, a lot of quantitative research has been done online via, using Google Forms and snowball approach, distributed to different people. So yeah, it depends on your situation. Qualitative research could be analyzing documents and literature, interviews, in-depth and semi-structured interviews, focus groups. So it depends on your type of research. What information was used in the development of the research instruments is very important. So if you're doing quantitative research and you're using all the constructs like intention to purchase and trust and awareness, those constructs must have come from other research that has been validated and published. So your journal articles is where you would find your construct information. And so all the scales you use need to come from somewhere. You can't just make it up. Likewise for qualitative research, from reading journal articles, you'll find articles that are similar to your study, and you can contact the authors and ask them for their research instruments. And the same is applicable for quantitative research if they don't give you the instrument in the actual article, and you need to cite where you got the information from in your research methodology section. It's very important to discuss reliability and validity, especially for quantitative, and these are statistical techniques that statisticians can help you up with, but you can read the theory in textbooks, and a lot of journal articles also include. So you must use validated research instruments, because if your research is not valid or reliable, then it's not worth anything. The field work, so you need to state how will the data be collected? Will there be field workers? Will it be telephonic, face-to-face, observational? Will it be conducted by electronically? So define the processes. Why is it most relevant? Data coding analysis, so how will the data be captured? So for quantitative research, you could use SPSS. For qualitative, Atlas TI. You generally start with descriptive stats for quantitative research and graphs, and then you move to more advanced statistical methods, mean, standard deviations, ANOVA, t-test, chi-squared, structural equation modeling, etc., where statisticians can help you with this. Qualitative, content analysis, conversational discourse, narrative analysis, or other aspects. Explain why the techniques you've used and consider how they'll help you answer your questions and objectives. That is the key of the stats from your data you collected, is to determine how it is to determine the answer to these questions or to give you insight. I'm not an expert in research methodology, but there are several other sections that other speakers that will cover just research methodology. This is just a broad overview. Then you have demarcation or delimitation or delimitation. So which aspects of the research area will you target for your research? Provide reasons why these areas are selected. So what are the boundaries of research? E.g., you're only looking at students, university students, not all millennials. Explain why. You're limited to Cape Town, not the whole of SA or other countries. Why? You're only looking at mobile shopping apps. Why not others? So sometimes it's helpful explaining what will be covered. So you're creating the boundaries of your research. Ethical considerations, so state the ethical considerations of your research. I know there's a workshop devoted to ethics. So you need to get CPUT ethics for your proposal. You need to consider informed consent, privacy, confidentiality, honesty, professionalism. There's a South African Marketing Research Association Code of Conduct that our students look at. What do all these mean? Define each of these. So look at all the ethics submission documents as a start and read about ethics in the research textbooks, and look at theses, what they've done, and journal articles, what they've done in terms of ethics, and that will help you write this section. Then you need to also provide an outline of your thesis in the research proposal template. Chapter 1 usually consists of introduction and background. Chapter 2, the literature review. Chapter 3, methodology. Chapter 4, the results or findings. Chapter 5, discussion analysis. Chapter 6, conclusions and recommendations. Sometimes people have 3 literature review chapters. Sometimes people combine chapters 5 and 6, although I prefer them separate. Then you need a research plan, so, and this needs to be realistic from when your proposal is accepted all the way through to when the grammarian changes are made, a final draft grammarian changes made, and then eventually your thesis will be submitted. Generally for masters, you're looking at a minimum of 2 years, but most people take 3 to 4 years to complete, and you need to cover all the major elements. Limitations of your research are possible hindrances that compromise your research. So you look at methodology, coverage, generalization of limitations. So if you're only looking at CPUT students, you can't really generalize your findings because they're very limited, So that's a limitation. Another limitation is you could be using just qualitative research, but that's, again, you can't generalize the findings. So again, every journal article provides a limitation section, so you can read that, and that could give you an idea of what you could include here. And here I give you examples. So the research study was conducted in a developing country where MCOMIS is not broadly used. A quantitative study was used, took a cross-sectional of the research, but longitudinal studies could provide more greater depth of information, as could qualitative. Cross-analysis of demographic variables were conducted, but other variables could be considered. Only the millennial cohort was examined, whereas others could be considered. So these are examples from the example that I've given you. Reference list is very important. Only include the sources that you cite in the text. You're not given a bibliography, so everything you in-text reference must be in your reference list. Everything in your reference list must be cited in the research proposal. The reference list is alphabetical. Research for the Harvard for Beginners. It's not called Harvard for Beginners anymore. It's called something else. In fact, let me just quickly tell you what that document is referred to now. General documents. It's called Quick Guide to Harvard now. I should really change that. It's called the Quick Guide to Harvard, and so these are available on the Post CPUT Research website, and these are just some YouTube videos that I created on referencing, so you're welcome to look at that. But when I made these videos, et al. Was still placed in italics, so now that's changed. Et al. For 3 or more authors is no longer placed in italics, but you're welcome to look at those YouTube videos. And then you need to create a summary at the end of your proposal in no more than 250 words on your problem statement, your aims and objectives, your methodology, your ethical considerations, and significance of the study. You don't provide any new data. There's no in-text references. It's just a summary and a couple of lines of each covering these elements. And that's the end of the presentation. So I'm going to stop recording now. And I hope you find it useful, and I will upload this on Blackboard for those of you who want to look at it.